Tonight, a warning of a worst-case scenario from the NHS as cases of the so-called superflu surge. The Royal College of Nurses warns that hospitals could be overwhelmed as the number of flu patients in hospitals' beds rises by more than a half in just a week. It comes as the Prime Minister urges resident doctors to accept a deal to end the Christmas strikes. It could pile further pressure on the health service in England. We'll hear what the doctors have to say about that. Also ahead, Nigel Farage hits back after a letter from his former school describes allegations of racism and anti-Semitism levelled at him as profoundly distressing. An appalling situation and an attack on democracy. Outrage after councillors in Kent were reportedly pelted with eggs by men in balaclavas during a council meeting. The government's plan to tackle the homelessness crisis is condemned as inadequate by charities. I'll speak to the co-founder of The Big Issue, Lord John Bird. And as an adult content creator, Bonnie Blue declares her support for Nigel Farage's policies. We'll discuss other unlikely political endorsements. Hopefully getting through the content filter tonight, our duo, James Stark and Baroness Thagam Debonair, will be with us for the next hour. It's 7 o'clock. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. All that to come on tonight's programme, but we are going to start with the latest in the escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela. Venezuela today has accused the US of piracy after an oil tanker was seized off the country's coast. The Trump White House said that the vessel was involved in shipping sanctioned oil. Well, this dramatic footage was released by the US government overnight, showing troops descending onto the ship from helicopters armed with weaponry. And the past hour, we've also heard from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. Let's have a listen into what she's had to say.
The vessel has been seized, as you know, and the Department of Justice did that in conjunction with the Coast Guard and the Department of War. The vessel is currently undergoing a forfeiture process right now. The United States currently has a full investigative team on the ground on the vessel, and individuals on board the vessel are being interviewed, and any relevant evidence is being seized. With respect to the oil, that's a different issue. As you know, Peter, the vessel will go to a U.S. port, and the United States does intend to seize the oil. However, there is a legal process for the seizure of that oil, and that legal process will be followed.
Let's go now live to Washington, D.C. Join our US correspondent, David Blevins, who's there for us tonight. David, very good evening to you. I mean, Donald Trump has spent quite a lot of the last year trying to dampen down conflicts and claim credit for it. On this one, he seems almost determined to stoke a conflict.
That does indeed seem to be the case. The Venezuelans are describing this as international piracy. Iran says it is a violation of international law, but not so, says the White House. You've just heard from Caroline Leavitt. She says this is President Trump honouring campaign commitments he made to thwart drug trafficking in the Caribbean and to thwart oil smuggling. You see, they claim that this vessel was funding foreign terrorist organisations by transporting sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. That's the line they're sticking to. The President's Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, has been under pressure over this issue on Capitol Hill today too. She says the President's efforts to thwart drug traffickers has saved the lives of, wait for it, 177 million Americans. That's a staggering claim. That's more than a third of the population. But that is the line they are sticking to in terms of the boat strikes and in terms of the military build-up in that region. But there are others on Capitol Hill asking difficult questions, Democrats in particular. They say that the interception of this vessel is evidence that this is much more about Trump pursuing regime change in Venezuela. But right now that doesn't appear to be working. President Nicolas Maduro doesn't look or sound like a man under any pressure. At a rally in Caracas, he's been singing, "Don't worry, be happy," and insisting that his country will fight until the last man is standing. He's also taken a telephone call from Russian President Vladimir Putin, expressing his solidarity with Venezuela at this time. But certainly those striking images don't bode well in terms of any effort to de-escalate the tension in the region.
OK, David, live for us there in Washington. As always, thank you very much indeed, David Beth. Now let's return to the major story here back in the UK tonight, and that is the NHS has warned of a worst-case scenario as a dangerous strain of flu continues to take hold across the country. As the latest data showed that the number of flu patients in hospitals has surged by more than half in just a week. The Prime Minister said that everyone should be taking precautions, but the government would not change the guidance on wearing face masks. Let's take you through some of the figures released today. NHS England say that 2,660 patients were in a hospital bed with flu every day last week, the highest ever number for this time of the year and up 55% on the week before. The figures also show that more than 17.4 million people have been vaccinated against the flu so far this year. That's over 170,000 more than this time last year. But A&E attendances have also hit a record for November with 2.35 million visits last month. That's more than 30,000 higher than last November. Well, the scale of that increase is reflected in this graph, which clearly shows the number of hospitalised flu patients so far this year, as you can see, surging above previous years. Well, as the government and the NHS try to grapple with the crisis, the Prime Minister called on resident doctors to accept a deal to avert strikes over the Christmas period.
I'm very concerned with the action of the BMA. They are being irresponsible, in my view. We have already put in place quite a significant pay rise. There are other issues that they're concerned about, which we've been listening to, and we put an offer on the table to deal with those issues. But that offer can only go forward if they don't take strike action, particularly in the run-up to Christmas, particularly when we've got a problem with flu. It would be irresponsible of BMA to push through.
Well, that's the government's view. A little earlier, I spoke to Dr. Callum Parr. He's the Deputy Chair of the UK Resident Doctors Committee at the BMA. We're obviously going to talk about the strikes in a second, but, you know, we have heard from the NHS today saying that it is facing the worst-case scenario with these flu cases this December. Just from your experience and talking to others, how bad is it looking for the NHS this month?
So I think it looks bad for the NHS every month. So I'm a resident doctor. That is my day job. Since I've been a doctor over the last few years, I often see patients one day, see them in A&E, and then I come back in for my shift the next day and they are still in A&E. I've seen patients who have to urinate in bottles while their relatives hold up blankets while they're in a corridor full of people. That is the level that our NHS operates in on a non-strike day.
But do you think that the NHS is exaggerating? I mean, is it particularly bad this month, or is it just like any other month?
So I think winter is always challenging. You have seasonal illnesses, and that's only exacerbated by the lack of staff, which is why we are screaming out for doctors in this country, and the BMA is asking West Streeting to do more about that, and that's why we have been in dispute.
Indeed. I mean, what's interesting is you're already talking about strikes. I'm trying to get a sense of just how bad things are for the National Health Service. They're calling this pretty unprecedented with this super flu. I mean, it does look like it is going to be quite bad, hence why some are suggesting that you're being cruel and calculated with having strikes literally within the next week.
I think this is all very avoidable. So we wrote to Wes Streeting on the 19th of November. So that's when our last strike action ended, asking him to come to the table. Sadly, he didn't respond to our letter at all. And then we met him on the Sunday just gone. So over 2 weeks later is when we spoke to the Secretary of State. And this is when he put forward this offer.
But it's also avoidable because apparently Wes Streeting said that he would extend your strike mandate so that actually, if you wanted to have strike action, you could have had it in the end of January rather than at the most difficult period of time for the NHS in the run-up to Christmas.
So Wes Streeting put an offer to us, and what he wanted us to do was to put it to our members. We think it's right that we let members have their say, so we have chosen to do that now. So we have put the offer to them factually. We have spelled out the facts as the government have put them to us, and we are asking members to have our say. So resident doctors will have their say on what is going on.
But the Health Secretary is right when he says that you're playing games with patients' lives, isn't he?
So I don't agree with that. So
really?
Secretary
so why go on strike then? If I mean, these strikes are not going to have any impact, are they?
So strikes are disruptive. Our action is always covered by our senior colleagues. So we have specialty and consultant colleagues who step down and cover our strikes, as they always have done. And we're really grateful for when they do that. But ultimately, what we are saying is that the NHS is in such a dire state every day. So in October, we saw over 100,000 patients waiting over 12 hours in A&E. If we had more doctors working in the NHS and we were retaining the ones that we do have, then that situation would be avoidable.
You're right, the NHS is in a difficult situation. You, of course, have the right to go on strike. To do it at the worst possible time, at a time, by the way, it looks like this is going to be the most difficult year for many years. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. You understand why people are not on your side. I mean, you're doing this to cause the most amount of damage you possibly can to the National Health Service at the most difficult period of time.
So we are limited by trade union legislation. So we last took our round of strike action in November.
Said he's prepared to change that or to help you out on that.
And asked the Secretary of State to come to the table with a better offer, and he had the opportunity to do that earlier, and we could have put this to our members earlier and potentially avoided this action. We are putting the offer as it has been presented to us factually to our members, and they will decide on the next steps.
When the health secretary say you're playing with patients' lives, playing games with patients, people will die, won't they? More people will die if you guys go on strike next week. That's simply a fact, isn't it?
So I don't agree with his characterisation. So resident doctors are the workhorses of the NHS. They have dedicated their working lives to caring for patients. That is what we do in, day out. So I see patients in A&E, I see patients on the wards. Wes Streeting saying things like doctors are juvenile delinquents. It is pretty appalling. These are the doctors who are trusted overnight to run the hospital. They are the most senior doctors overnight in the hospital. They perform life-saving operations if you have a bleed on your brain or if your heart is to stop. There is nothing juvenile or delinquent about that in any way, shape or form.
And those are the words of the Health Secretary, not mine, but I'm putting his also words that you're playing games with patient lives. I'm suggesting to you that if you go on strike next week, more patients will die. You've just explained why your job is important. People will die.
So our action is covered by the consultant and specialty colleagues. So there is always going to be medical care, even on our strike days. So we have the most senior doctors who have often over a decade or more of experience will be covering our action. That is the case as it has been with all of our strike action, and they deliver the urgent and emergency care to cover our strike action.
And what's your personal view? I know you're consulting your members. Do you think the strike should go ahead? Are you going to vote for a strike action?
So I'll be voting in the indicative poll, but it's not for me to say what I will or won't be voting for. That is for my members, the resident doctors of the NHS. We have presented it to them and they will get to vote over the next few days, and we will see which way that vote goes.
OK. Callum, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was Dr. Callum Parr from the BMA speaking to me a little earlier. Let's bring in our duo for this evening, former Conservative Special Advisor James Starkey and the Labour peer Dagenham Debonair. Very good evening to you both. What do you make of all of this?
It's hard to watch that interview because, you know, whilst obviously I respect doctors, they put in a lot of work, they put in a lot of training, but so too do nurses, consultants, care workers. Everyone involved in the healthcare service works hard. Everybody. And you have to apply what I think of as the mom test. Like, the first thing I thought of was, what if my mom falls next week? Everybody will be thinking the same. And it's problematic.
But isn't the argument from their point of view is it's bad all year round, and some of this is because, you know, doctors are leaving the profession because they're not well paid. You know, the pressures, effectively, if they don't go on strike, nothing's going to change, and so they just need to go on strike.
If they go on strike, as you said in your interview, they are risking patients' health. And I know that the resident doctor there made a decent effort to say, well, it'll be covered. But people will have delayed treatment. They will have delayed entry for elective surgery. There will be operations cancelled. And at a time when the NHS is under yet more strain because of winter, seasonal illnesses such as flu, and when we're making such progress, I mean, the NHS... People working in the NHS have been crying out for change for years. Last year, the people of the United Kingdom voted for change. And since then, we've brought waiting lists down, we've recruited more GPs, we've got a 10-year NHS plan. You don't need me to make the full Labour list, but we actually have got a plan.
You are allowed to. You are a Labour peer, so it's acceptable.
I think it's really tragic to stall that progress.
James?
I think they've totally lost the public, I think. personally, the doctors on this one.
But
I think what they're asking...
But isn't it? But I know, and that's an argument that's made. But I don't know. But I'm sure they would make the cases. At the end of the day, they're not here to win over the public. They're here, they would argue, to get a better deal on pay, a deal that they've argued they've not been paid properly for years and years and years and years.
I think the public always does matter in these things, because without the more you lack public support, the harder it's going to be to make your argument. And where you can tell Wes Streeting the health secretary feels emboldened on this. You know, the gentleman there used some of the language that Wes had used. You could talk about whether you think that's appropriate. But the fact that Wes is using pretty punchy language to talk about doctors as a Labour health secretary, that tells me that he feels like in a quite confident position that he's got a bit of support behind him in government and definitely public support.
And the thing is that last year, the NHS doctors, resident doctors, got a pay rise. Yes, it does not make up for the cuts under successive Tory governments, but it was a pretty substantial pay rise.
But isn't also the problem here, and we do know this, I know this, I've got friends, you know, they're going to Australia, they're going to Canada, they're going to New Zealand and elsewhere. So, obviously not everyone, but a big part of that is around pay.
But this is, just to say this as well, this is why this whole issue is also a huge test. Because, you know, Labour came in and they did make all these promises. And I think with Wes was seen as one of the, you know, if you kind of listen to the narrative, he's seen as one of the most effective ministers. He's very determined. He's going to do all this stuff. He's now basically walked into another doctor strike. And it's true, you know, they got the pay deal last year, but there weren't enough conditions that they're now facing the same things this year. And so I don't want to make it a totally party political point, but I do think it is a test for Streeting, someone who, let's be realistic, someone who's being touted as a future Labour leader, I think it's, if he can't deal with this, he won't be able to deal with
what he's dealing with is pay cuts that were instituted under Tory and actually coalition governments. I remember going out to talk to, as they were then, junior doctors in 2013, when they were taking action at that point, and I wanted to understand the issues, and they were taking cuts then, and they've had successive pay cuts, and this is where I have a lot of sympathy, but actually, what's happened since then is that when a Labour government came in, Wes Streeting, one of the first things he did was settle that dispute by bringing in a pay rise.
But why did he not get more conditions that he's now facing the same thing 12 months later?
Well, that's for the junior doctors to decide, isn't it? The resident doctors. And I think that's the problem, is that the resident doctors, other parts of the NHS are working with the Health Secretary on how we turn around the damage that's been done by 14 Tory years. Now, that is what we would hope to get from the junior doctors and the resident doctors. I do have a lot of sympathy with their cause, because they have suffered a real terms pay cut over the last 15 years. However, I really want them to hear Wes Streeting's offer and choose not to strike in the middle of the
Well, we're going to see, because that vote is taking place over the weekend. We're expecting results on Monday. From my point of view, it doesn't look like they are going to back down. But I take your point, James, that actually, I think that what may weigh heavily on some of them is the public mood going into this weekend. For the moment, guys, thank you very much indeed, because this story is almost certainly going to feature in tomorrow's papers, and we've got our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening. That's with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us tonight will be the editor of The Courier, that's David Clegg, and the senior political commentator and columnist at The Telegraph, Annabel Denham. Now, let's move on, because Dulwich College has said that allegations that Nigel Farage made racist and anti-Semitic comments to fellow pupils at the school are profoundly distressing, according to a letter obtained by Sky News. The Reform UK leader has faced allegations he engaged in racist and anti-Semitic behaviour while he was a pupil at the top private school in South London almost 50 years ago. Well, let's get more on this. Bring in Mara Aurora, who's with me in the studio. Very good evening to you. Just talk us through what is in this letter.
So, essentially, we've had a situation now. Stories have emerged of over 30 people who went to school with Nigel Farage claiming different allegations. Now, this is the first reported response from Dulwich College themselves. And this letter here that we've got, this is a letter from the Master of Dulwich College to Mr Lee, who is one of the people who's spoken to Sky News and alleged some of these accusations and anti-Semitic comments were made to him when he was at school with Nigel Farage. So in a response, Robert Milner, who is the Master of Dulwich College, has said allegations of racist and anti-Semitic conduct are profoundly distressing, and it is important to say clearly that such behaviour is wholly incompatible with the values of the college that the college holds. He then goes on to say what we can unequivocally state is that behaviours described are entirely at odds with the Dulwich College of today. And he also talks about why the college had been slightly silent in terms of their public response to this. And they've said this should not be interpreted as indifference. It was about protecting their reputation and being quite careful about how they responded. Now, Nigel Farage has come back in reaction to this letter, and he has said, I have not met or spoken to this master, so I am surprised by his uninformed comments in response to claims from nearly 50 years ago from politically motivated actors. If he is interested, I can show him the many messages that I have received from fellow pupils, including Jewish ones, that entirely contradict these allegations. And a Reform UK spokesperson has also called this a witch hunt, said that it is left-wing media and deeply unpopular Labour Party that are trying to push this narrative, and that the British people will see through it. Now, for context, for those who might not remember all the details, Mr. Leahy alleged that that Farage sang anti-Semitic songs at him and Jewish pupils, and also that he had a big issue with anyone called Patel. And at the time when those allegations came out from Mr. Leahy, Farage had said he'd never directly racially abused anybody at Dulwich College, and he insisted that there was a strong political element to the allegations. So you can see that really it's rumbling on, but this is the first time we've heard from Dulwich College themselves, which is why it's so significant.
OK. Mari, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us here. OK, you are watching the Politics Hub. Up next, an MP has condemned what he has called an attack on democracy after telling the Commons that councillors in Kent were pelted with eggs while debating an asylum proposal. We'll be discussing that and finding out more after this break. Stay tuned.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
An MP has told the House of Commons that councillors in Kent were violently intimidated during a debate this week. Local MP Kevin McKenna said the councillors were pelted with eggs by men in balaclavas during a debate about making the borough a district of sanctuary for asylum seekers. Now, the incident happened at Swale Borough Council in Kent on Wednesday. The issue was raised in the Commons this morning, and it brought this response from the Speaker.
Operation Forward is the contacts that need to be made within the constabulary. I would expect them to take over, and I would expect players who are embedded within Parliament who also connect to Operation Forward for local authorities, purely for councillors. That hotline is there to every police force in the country. So I hope that people respond accordingly to what I find an appalling situation. An attack on democracy is not acceptable.
Well, I've spoken to Kevin McKenna. He is the MP for Sittingbourne and Sheppey, which contains the council area. Kevin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just explain from your point of view what went on the other night at the council.
So last night there was a motion put forward before council. A lot of people locally had some issues with it. Honestly, a load of people got into the council chamber who caused a lot of trouble. People were there in the public gallery wearing balaclavas, people were shouting abuse, people were threatening councillors. I mean, it clearly got out of hand. My understanding is that people knew beforehand this was likely to happen, and there were police already in the building, and obviously extra security on. But despite that, there was a whole sort of load of vandalism in the building as well. So toilets were vandalised, water overflowed in the toilets because sinks were blocked. That's flooded the building. There was a lift that was damaged. That's put the council building out of action today.
And I heard that at least one egg was thrown and, you know, quite abusive language. And people in balaclavas, I mean, how is that even... I mean, if the police were already there, it seems quite extraordinary that this was allowed to happen.
Oh, extremely abusive language. I mean, unacceptable language. It would be unacceptable in just about any context, but certainly not a council meeting. And yes, I mean, from my point of view, and I think a lot of colleagues that I've spoken to today here in Westminster, actually, the people in balaclavas clearly shouldn't be there in the public gallery. It's massively unsafe. But I've also spoken to a lot of colleagues who've said similar things have been happening in councils around the country as well.
Do we have any idea who these people are?
So, obviously, the police are doing a full investigation. I'd want to see the full results of that. We know that locally there are some people who've put themselves forwards, who campaign a lot on TikTok and other social media platforms, who, you know, they claim that they're involved. I wouldn't want to prejudge the police inquiry. You know, and how many of these people were local, how many of the people were... Obviously, there are people who wanted to come along and protest about the motion itself, which is absolutely fine. And of course, the debate in the chamber as well was it was an open debate. The motion was defeated in the end as well. So, but unfortunately, that debate wasn't able to happen in a peaceful way without the threat of violence, and that could influence the way that people voted.
And this is all around asylum seekers, isn't it? And we'll not get into the details of what was proposed. It's a very specific thing to the council, but is there a point here, and, you know, no one is going to condone or should definitely not condone violence or abusive behaviour, but is this also a reminder, just in a broader sense of responsibility to politicians and governments who promise things time again? I mean, we heard Rishi Sunak saying stop the boats, and we heard Keir Starmer saying smash the gangs. Let's be frank about it, neither of which has happened. The people, when they feel let down by the politicians, do then get really frustrated about things.
Oh, I think it's much wider than asylum as well. I mean, let's be clear. The country has been in a state for years now where public services have not been working. People struggle to access the NHS.
I just mean, no, I get that, but I mean, very specifically on this, each political party has made very strident promises on this, and they've both failed on it. And people are frustrated about that.
And the boats need to be stopped. And, you know, there are plans in place that will help stop the boats and stop this issue. But speaking to my constituents, it's much bigger than that. And although asylum and asylum seekers are the flashpoints, and often people will say, oh, well, there are people claiming asylum, that's why I can't access public services. It's that inability to access public services, the strain on the transport system, the strain on the school system, the health system. At root, that's actually the biggest issue for local people. Okay. And, you know, and actually, if we're not successful as a government in addressing that, this problem will persist. If we do, and we can overcome a lot of the inequalities and social inequalities in constituencies like mine, this will continue to be a problem.
OK, Kevin, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Kevin McKenna there, the MP, speaking to me a little earlier. Let's pick this up with our duo tonight. And James, I'm going to start with you. What do you think of my final point there, where I'm, you know, obviously I am no way suggesting what went on is acceptable, but we've seen a polarisation and an anger in politics. And it is a reflection, I think, of the fact that people feel let down by, I would say, the two main political parties.
So I totally agree with you. You can't ever even give any leeway to people that are doing things like this. So we're careful not to do that. But in your wider point about anger, yeah, people are really, really angry. And they're fed up with the two main parties. And I know my party, the Conservative Party, played its role in that, on immigration and other issues. And I think Labour have had the same problem. Just look at the polling for either the Prime Minister himself or the Labour Party, that people are immediately too frustrated. I mean, one of the points that I would make is, I do think even on my side, on the Conservatives, the public now just lump us in with both parties. They don't really, I don't think, see a massive difference between Labour and the Tories. They just see the establishment parties. And that's why you're seeing the rise of reform to the left of the Labour Party, the rise of the Greens. And I think if Corbyn's crew managed to get their act together, which is unlikely. You would. But I think if they were coherent, you'd see the rise of them.
Do you think I'm going too far, or do you think I've got a point in that?
I think people are angry about a lot of things, Darren, and I think it's really interesting that this is the issue which seems to attract violence. And in my view, that makes it doubly unacceptable. There are ways of protesting. If you think there are too many asylum seekers, there are ways of expressing that view. If you think that there is something wrong, let's go back to your previous article, actually. The resident doctors are not breaking into Wes Streeting's office and throwing eggs at him. They're angry too. I think there is a lot of anger, but I think it is distressing to find that it is on this issue, which involves vulnerable people who have often fled violent conflict and torture, who are the ones who are being picked on. And that's a real problem for me.
It is. All I would say is, because I think of all the issues that I can think of, in 2010, David Cameron promised to get migration down. He did the same in 2015. Yeah, Theresa May did the same in 2017. Boris Johnson 2019. And Labour Party have made the same argument in 2024. And that's my point is, people have repeatedly voted for parties and leaders who said on this very particular issue they were going to get it under control and bring... Yeah. And the opposite actually has happened.
You're now conflating migration with asylum, and they're not the same thing, because you just said... you did.
But my point is in both issues, though. Irregular and irregular migration.
Well, in this two specific issues, so David Cameron said he'd get migration down. That isn't the same as asylum, which is a minority of the numbers of people coming to this country. The majority of people come into this country do so legally. They come here to work. And I think there are problems there, by the way. I think there are problems in the way that we treat people who come to work in this country. I think there are problems with the way we treat people, for example, people from Afghanistan who worked alongside our armed forces in Afghanistan, and we promised them we'd take care of them, and we have not. And that is a problem too. I think what I find distressing, though, is the point I was trying to make, which is, on this one issue, people are moved to violence and against people who are, by definition, fleeing violence. I think the Labour Party is trying to sort that out.
What the Council wanted to do was to create a sanctuary, we should say, for something.
And I applaud that.
Just finally on this, James?
Look, I take your point on this issue attracts violence, but I do think people are really fed up. Darren, your points, people have repeatedly been promised controls on legal migration and an end, and to quote, to stop the boats and smash the gangs. And it hasn't happened. You don't need to look at this, you just need to look at the polls. The two main parties are tracking below 20%. That's the lowest. They've never tracked below combined, so below 40%. They've never tracked below a combined 60% in about 50, 60 years. Maybe 80, actually, since the Liberal collapse in the 20s. So we've got the lowest support for the two main parties in a couple of generations. That is because people are tired of being lied to.
And they're also tired of the cost of living, though, aren't they? And they're tired of the cost of living.
A whole range of things.
They're tired of the housing crisis. They're tired of the NHS not working.
And it's all connected.
And none of those things are caused by asylum seekers. No, none of those.
Can I just...
seeing hotels spend 5 billion on...
It's a slightly different thing, but actually I thought in some ways, in my brain at least, anyway, this fed into... this story today, which is Wes Streeting today saying that he thinks that Labour are being practical and technocratic. It feels that the government is the maintenance department of the country. And that's, I think the point is, and why voters left on is because they were promised, and the Prime Minister says this, change at the last election. And even Wes Streeting suggesting that they are, so far, the maintenance department for the country, that they're not bringing around radical change. And he's in the government.
Which is an interesting thing for a member of the government to be saying. I get people's frustration. My test is whether or not people are putting back the Tesco own brand products in Newport Tesco's. Sorry, other supermarkets are obviously available. But that's because people are still suffering from a cost of living crisis, and it is understandable when people are feeling hard up and fed up, they can't get a hospital appointment and they're struggling with their kids' school not being maintained properly. I totally get why people are frustrated and they want change now. But most of those people are not breaking into council offices, throwing things at people who are trying to fix the situation. That's not a legitimate way of expressing anger. And coming as it does in the wake of murders and attacks on not just MPs, but also attacks on councillors.
And we should reflect
I find that reprehensible.
And we should reflect that. Obviously, the Speaker getting involved today, suggesting that, this should be elevated, given the threat that it seems MPs and indeed councillors today are under. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a quick break here on the Politics Up. Up next, as the government announces its plans to have long-term rough sleeping and prevent homelessness, we'll be hearing the thoughts of the co-founder of The Big Issue. That's Lord John Bird, after the break. The government has announced its national plan to halve the number of long-term rough sleepers and to prevent homelessness. The strategy includes £3.5 billion of funding to tackle the issue, but Charities has said the plan so far falls short. This is what the Minister for Local Government and Homelessness, Alison McGovern, said a little earlier in the comments.
On those goals, ending the use of B&Bs, halving long-term rough sleeping, and making sure that we increase the rate at which homelessness is prevented. I know that everyone in this House wants all of our places up and down the country to succeed, because now more than ever we need our partners to join us in this mission. Councils, frontline public services, homelessness organisations, voluntary community faith groups. Together, if we join forces, this strategy will set us on the path to ending homelessness and deliver immediate action to improve the lives of people experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping.
Well, I've also spoken to Lord Bird, of course, the co-founder of The Big Issue. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I suppose my first question is, what do you make of this strategy? It's a lot of money, and to be fair to the government, they're pretty clear that they are committed to tackling homelessness.
Yeah, I think the government is committed. I think it's put a lot of money in, and it's shown that there is the real resolve to carry out what they said they were going to do in their manifesto. I do think we also ought to bear in mind that over the decades, certainly since the days of the foundation of The Big Issue, there have been many government initiatives, and under Tony Blair, they managed to get rid of almost most rough sleeping, and they really did, through the Rough Sleepers Initiative, manage to get people housed and moved on. So we've got almost a kind of golden period that was probably 25, 30 years ago. And in comparison to today, we seem to have many more problems. We have people coming from other countries seeking help. We have people who are having problems with their housing benefit because the government has kept the costs down. We have a lack of social housing. We also have what I think is the most lacking, and I've been telling every government this for the last 34 years, and that is, where is the future? Where is the prevention? We keep dealing with the emergency, and because we keep dealing with the emergency, we will always have an emergency.
Isn't that the point, though?
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just saying, isn't that the point, though, John? And you're right, this is a problem that's getting worse. I think it's up 8% under Labour. And I get about tackling the underlying causes of this, but they are so complex that, in all honesty, is any government going to be able to prevent lots of the reasons that lead to homelessness?
Well, I think that's a bit of an excuse, because you see, if you look at the figures and you look at the people who are falling into homelessness, a lot of them are people who have come from limited education opportunities. They come from poverty. They've inherited poverty from their families, and they therefore are on the back foot at the very beginning of life. And then they get on with their lives. They have a family and themselves, and then they find that, you know, some reversal happens in their lives, and they fall into long-term unemployment. They fall into homelessness. And I think the thing is that everybody always says it's so complex, but actually, if you make the investment in the early stages of people's lives, if you make an investment in the children and in the parents to get them so that they don't pass the poverty on to the next generation. I know all about this because I inherited poverty, and it took me decades to get out of the trouble of inherited poverty.
Andy Burnham today suggesting that the government in some ways is making this situation worse. I know they've frozen housing allowance, for example. He's suggesting we should go back to the COVID initiative, and, you know, homelessness is not just people who are living in temporary accommodation, as you rightly pointed out, it's people sleeping on the streets, that he should bring back everyone in, this idea that the state should provide accommodation, particularly for rough sleepers, all of the time. Is that possible?
Well, I would like the government to get behind the initiatives that are happening now to take over empty properties. I've been told that there's between 600,000 and 800,000 empty properties in the UK. So if you actually started to use that, but then you would have to start, the government would have to say, OK, we're going to do very, very draconian things. We're going to take over property, Ministry of Defence property, local authority property, and we're going to use the spaces above offices, the spaces above shops, all these wonderful initiatives that helped solve the problem 25 years ago.
Yeah, and you know, there's even pressure on that stock as we speak. Just very finally and briefly, John, if you can, you know, we're in the Christmas periods. Homelessness feels particularly stark at this time of the year, particularly rough sleeping. Minister's saying today that you shouldn't give money directly to homeless people. What's your advice around that?
I think it's entirely up to the person who is making that decision. It's their money. They can spend it the way they want. I always believe that if we put our money into the organisations who are getting people off the streets, people like Crisis, people like The Big Issue, people like St Mungo's, I think it would be money best spent. But the public have a right to make a decision what they do with their money. And I would never balk at anybody. What they're trying to do is demonstrate their humanity. It may not actually get the person off the streets. But at a time like this, I think we should be thinking of their everyday humanity, the pressing crisis that they're in while on the streets.
OK, Lord John Bird, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely a man who knows a lot about homelessness and a man that in many ways has praised the government. I mean, this is a lot of money and it's a proper strategy, but still this sense that it's not tackling the underlying causes that lead to homelessness.
Yes, because they're multiple and complex, and politics is really quite bad at doing multiple and complex and nuanced. We have, you know, we've already mentioned the cost of living crisis, but we've also got a situation where young people, they can't save up enough to buy a home, but they also are facing astronomical rents. Now, obviously, they don't all become homeless, but it creates the perfect storm in which homelessness is likely to arise with just one error or one thing going wrong or one paycheck missed or one job lost. And when you have all of that and you have on top of that a complex layer of homelessness that's to do with things like relationship breakdown, we still have very high levels of domestic violence. And being able to tackle all of that at once is huge. However, we did bring down homelessness. In the last Labour government, we brought it down dramatically, and it's because we took that long term.
So it has gone up, as I said...
It's gone up in the last 15 years.
Well, it's gone up also under...
What was happening in those 15 years? We've had just over a year to fix a problem that's been growing and getting worse over 15 years. Yeah, I'm glad we've got a strategy.
That's definitely a challenge to you then, James.
It has got... I think it has got worse. I think the austerity is something to do with that. Of course it is. And I think when I've looked at it, I've have a mental health campaign and spoke to some people around homelessness. And one example I was given, which my point is, it's not a single amount of money. Every year, and the Tories did put some money into it, would target money at homelessness. And Daniel's right, it's more than about the money you give once a year to a homelessness project or whatever. It's a whole underlying range of issues. So the example that was given to me is there was someone who was picked up for a crime, held in remand in a prison, I think in Kettering, taken to court because it was in Norwich. The court decided we don't have enough time, so they released them. The prison said, well, we don't want them back, they're not in the justice system anymore. The court said, well, we don't need them either. And so they were given a free train ticket, which is apparently what you get in those circumstances, and they just went off back. Now, they had clear mental health issues that were not addressed because basically what you had is a whole range of authorities who didn't want to take responsibility.
And that
might be because of the money they've got.
And
it's a problem.
But can I just push you on? Can I just push you on that though? Yeah. I could also turn around and say that the safety net of the state stepping in to help people has also never been greater. I mean, the state, on the whole, relative to any period of our history, does more to help people than it, on the whole, than it's ever done in the past.
But we've also returned, I think, unfortunately, to a notion of deserving and undeserving poor. And James has referred to a prisoner on remand. I had a prison when I was a Member of Parliament in my constituency, and regularly there were problems with the staffing of the prison. That, again, I'm afraid, was due to Tory government cuts. And on a Friday afternoon, if someone was released on a Friday afternoon, which was a regular occurrence, probation weren't open, the homelessness department wasn't open, they went straight onto the streets. Every agency wanted to make it someone else's problem. And that was a lot to do with austerity. I'm afraid it was. But it's also to do with attitudes, because nobody wins votes saying, let's have more homes for prisoners.
Well,
and yet we need them to be
clearly
housed.
got to do with, you know, the Justice Department working with everyone else and a bit more maybe joined up government, but there we go. OK, for the moment, thank you very much indeed, because we are going to take a break, and believe me, we're going to be talking about something very different in just a couple of minutes. Why Bonnie Blue, and if you don't know who Bonnie Blue is, you maybe want to Google her during the break, is backing Nigel Farage and reform. Join us then.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, a warning that the NHS is facing a worst-case scenario as flu cases surge. We ask whether it's time for people to start wearing masks. Plus, a special report on those overstaying their visas, with claims they could number in the hundreds of thousands. And as the ballot opens for the World Cup, we meet a Scottish superfan hoping to secure a seat. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter.
I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor, free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first. Now, a vote is a vote, so Reform are not complaining, but Nigel Farage's party today won perhaps the most unlikely political endorsement of the year, maybe even the decade, after the adult content creator Bonnie Blue wrote a guest article in The Spectator magazine in which she voiced her support for the party. Here's what she had to say. I'm not knowledgeable about politics, but I do know the UK is very messed up. The tax system is terrible, and it's smart to leave if you have money. There are too many people here who we are accommodating, and it's causing problems. Reform has sensible positions on immigration and inheritance tax. So I stand with Nigel Farage. James?
Thanks for getting to me first on that one. I mean, I think two things I would say is, one, I don't really think celebrity endorsements make a difference. I mean, I was on the referendum, and if celebrity endorsements were going to sway things, we'd have lost that by about 70%, and it didn't happen. So I don't think they make a huge amount of difference.
Does it not create a sense of momentum, though, that, you know, the celebrities tend to back people they think are going to win?
Yeah, to a degree that's true, but I think, do you see more of this when someone's on a winning role? Yes. Does it make a difference? My point is, I don't believe when a celebrity, when they write a letter to The Guardian saying we should do this, I don't think it changes anything. I think history tells you that. I think you're right on the momentum point. The interesting thing about Bonnie Blue is there was I might be quoting something from Pop Bitch here, if I'm allowed to say that. But the email, which is that Farage allegedly turned down an invite to a wedding because Bonnie Blue was going to be there, which kind of tells me he maybe doesn't think it's the best endorsement.
Yeah, I think the party may well be divided on that. Tangan, what do you think?
I mean, celebrity endorsements, very sadly.
By the way, Labour I've got a list here of who Labour have got. It's quite good. Kate Moss, Stormzy, Sir Elton John, Gary Lineker.
Was that for the general election last year?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Well,
Actually, the general election in 2019 was probably the same list.
I've got the Conservative list. I've got the Conservative list here that my producers provided, and it's just got Bob Geldof and Roger Moore.
Bob Geldof back the Conservatives.
Really?
Well, I don't know. I think that might have been Michael Caine.
I think we need to watch that. I mean, there are celebrity endorsements and celebrity endorsements, but there's also campaigns and campaigns. Kamala Harris had some great celebrity endorsements, and to my immense sadness, did not win. There are all sorts of... history is, I'm afraid, littered with the history of celebrity endorsements of politicians and it going, maybe that would have been better that nobody had said anything. Time will tell whether this was a good one, but it's interesting that she says she doesn't know anything about politics, but she thinks that Nigel Farage has got the right ideas. I mean, it may be that she's tapping into some sort of zeitgeisty thing here, but Nigel Farage's ideas on immigration, I think at various points, reforms policies have included, or certainly been floated, the idea of returning an awful lot of people who are here legally, working, earning, but were not born here.
Just in terms of, like, just picking up what you said there about the US, when actually you look at the US, you know, these pop stars or rock stars, they do massive concerts and there's big... Whereas we get Maureen Lipman in a party political broadcast.
Now, that's a good one. That's
it's
a classic.
Good one, but it's not really comparable, is
The
it?
best celebrity advert, I think, was a woman who was not a celebrity before, and she's a woman called Brenda from Bristol, who was, in fact, a constituent of mine. That was the best one, and it will meme out for the centuries to come.
And actually, I think that did some damage, because they were literally like, we do not want another general election.
She didn't want to be door knocked, I can tell you that.
Yeah. What do you think, James? It was in, like, compared to the US, our game, our political celebrity endorsement game seems pretty meek, to put it mildly.
The whole thing's lower level. I mean, when Trump or the Democrats have their rallies, they have, like, football stadiums.
It's huge.
You know, when we have ours, they're kind of like somewhere in Birmingham. There's not everyone in Birmingham.
And is there ever a celebrity endorsement, aside from this one, that you think actually politicians really don't want? All I can think of is... wasn't it Russell Brand who backed Ed Miliband in 2015?
And that worked.
That has not aged well.
Yeah.
It's not.
I don't think it's worked for anyone.
Nobody at all.
Anyone else? Who was on the Leave? Who was
one.
on the Leave campaign?
We had Sol Campbell backed Leave. I organised an event with him. James Cracknell.
Oh, yes, of course.
The Olympic rower.
Trying to become a Conservative MP, didn't he?
Yeah, and they're the ones I can remember.
Anyway, well, I'm glad we've had your celebrity endorsements tonight of this programme, and that is it, indeed, for us. Thank you very much, Tangan and Jane, for joining us here on the Politics Hub. That is it, indeed, for the entire week. We'll be back, of course, on Monday at 7. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. Have a good evening and a good weekend. Bye-bye.